Before the first breath is drawn, before the first cry echoes through the halls of time, the soul stands at a threshold, one veiled in both divine purpose and perilous uncertainty. It is here, in the silent chambers of the unseen, that a choice is made, a choice so profound its reverberations will ripple across lifetimes. For the soul does not arrive blindly into the world of form. It selects, weighs, and commits. Among its most consequential decisions is the family into which it will be born, a choice that Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, revealed to be fraught with consequences far beyond the mortal understanding of lineage or blood. Cayce's readings, those enigmatic transmissions from the Akashic records, speak of souls gathering in the halls of learning between incarnations, where the architecture of destiny is drafted with meticulous care. Yet, what if the blueprint is flawed? What if the family chosen, those who will shape the earliest impressions of love, fear, and identity, is not the crucible of growth the soul believed it to be, but a snare? The records whisper of souls who, in their eagerness to resolve ancient debts or accelerate their evolution, misjudge the vibrational resonance of their would-be kin. They enter into karmic contracts with entities whose lessons are not wisdom but suffering, whose bonds are not liberation but chains. Once the thread of fate is woven into the tapestry of a bloodline, unwinding it demands lifetimes of atonement. Consider the weight of such a decision. The soul, in its pre-birth clarity, may see the potential for healing old wounds or mastering elusive virtues. Yet the human experience is a labyrinth of free will and unseen variables. A parent's unresolved rage, a sibling's betrayal, a lineage cursed by generational trauma. These are the hidden currents that can drag the soul into depths it never intended to plumb. Cayce's readings are replete with accounts of entities who, upon crossing back into the spirit realm, lament not the trials they endured, but the misalignment of their choice. They speak of families that were mirrors of their own unresolved shadows, amplifying rather than dissolving the karmic burdens they sought to transcend. The implications are staggering. If the family is the first temple of the soul's earthly pilgrimage, then a misstep in its selection is not merely an error. It is the architecture of a prison. Yet, within this revelation lies a paradox as old as time itself. The soul is never truly a victim of its choices, only a student of their consequences. The question then arises, not as an accusation, but as an invitation to awaken. What if the family you were born into was never meant to be your salvation, but your greatest test? Let this thought settle like dust upon the pages of your own history. Trace the contours of your earliest memories, the unspoken vows and silent wars that shape the landscape of your becoming. For in the quiet spaces between what was chosen and what was endured, the soul's true curriculum is revealed. And perhaps in the act of questioning, the first thread of liberation is pulled. The soul's biggest mistake, choosing the wrong family. Edgar Cayce's Forbidden Truth, Chapter 2, The Karmic Web. How pre-birth choices bind the soul. Across time, long before the first breath is drawn, the soul stands at a crossroads, one where the threads of past deeds and future debts intertwine. Here, karma is not merely a philosophical abstraction but a living ledger, its entries written in the ink of ancestral bonds and unresolved lessons. The ancient Vedic texts spoke of Sanchita karma, the accumulated burden of past lives, waiting to be activated by the soul's next incarnation. Yet, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, revealed a deeper layer, that the family into which a soul chooses to be born is not random, but a deliberate selection, one that can either liberate or ensnare. Consider the case of the soul who, in a past existence, abandoned a child to pursue spiritual ascension. The karmic debt demands repayment, and so, in a subsequent life, it is drawn to a family where it must endure the same abandonment, now as the forsaken, not the forsaker. The Bhagavad Gita warns that such cycles persist until the lesson is learned. Yet Cayce's readings suggest an even more intricate design. The soul does not merely endure its karma, but co-creates it, selecting parents, siblings, and even adversaries who will force the confrontation it once avoided. The Tibetan Book of the Dead echoes this, describing how the newly departed soul, in the bardo state, is drawn to parents whose vibrations resonate with its unresolved conflicts. A choice made in haste or in denial can thus become a chain. Modern spiritual teachers, from Dolores Cannon to Michael Newton, have documented souls who in life between lives regressions express profound regret over familial choices. One such account tells of a soul who, eager to accelerate its growth, selected a family rife with addiction and violence, only to spend lifetimes trapped in the same patterns, unable to break free because the karmic lesson had been too harshly set. The irony. The soul had believed itself strong enough to transcend the environment, yet the weight of collective family karma proved heavier than anticipated. And so one must ask how many of today's struggles, repeated betrayals, inherited traumas, the inexplicable pull towards certain relationships, are echoes of a pre-birth contract poorly considered. The family you were born into may not be an accident but a classroom. If the curriculum was chosen unwisely, the soul pays the price in installments of suffering, lifetime after lifetime. Pause, then, and examine the faces around your table. Are they mirrors or shackles? The answer may reveal whether your soul's greatest mistake was not in what it did, but in where it chose to learn. The soul's silent lament. When regret echoes beyond the veil, they do not speak of it in the halls of the living. This quiet sorrow that lingers in the Akashic records, the whispered confessions of souls who upon crossing back into the light, realize too late the weight of their choice. For if karma is the architect of destiny, then the family into which a soul incarnates is its first and most consequential blueprint. What happens when that blueprint is flawed? When the lessons intended to elevate instead become shackles, and the love meant to nurture instead smothers or abandons. The readings of Edgar Cayce, that sleeping prophet of the early 20th century, reveal a truth seldom acknowledged. Some souls carry regret not for the lives they lived, but for the cradles they chose before ever drawing breath. Consider the case of the Roman matron Claudia, whose soul Cayce claimed had selected a lineage of power and influence in the hope of mastering ambition, only to find itself entangled in a web of political betrayals that spanned 3 lifetimes. Her spirit, bound by the karmic debt of a family whose hunger for control corrupted her own path, was said to linger in the astral planes, murmuring of the chains we forge before we are born. Or the Tibetan monk whose soul, seeking to transcend attachment, incarnated into a merchant's household in 9th century Baghdad, only to drown in the very materialism it had hoped to conquer. His regret was not recorded in scrolls but in the trembling hands of mediums who later channeled his despair. I chose the wrong classroom and the teacher was greed. Such stories are not mere folklore. They emerge again and again across cultures that acknowledge the soul's pre-birth contracts. The ancient Egyptians spoke of the weighing of the family, a moment in the Doat where the heart of the deceased was measured not only against Mart's feather, but against the unseen burdens of ancestral ties. The Hindu Garuda Purana warns of Pitru Dosha, the ancestral curse borne by souls who, in their haste to evolve, select bloodlines still ensnared in unresolved cycles of suffering. Even the Catholic mystics, in their visions of purgatory, describe souls delayed in their ascent not by personal sin, but by the unseen debts of those who gave them flesh. What then does this regret mean for the journey of the soul? It is not, as some might assume, a sign of failure, but an invitation to deeper accountability. A soul that recognizes its misstep is one poised for correction, for the universe does not punish misjudgment so much as it recycles it. The matron's descendants may find themselves in positions of power once more, but this time the lesson is not ambition, it is integrity. The monk's lineage might produce a beggar who in his emptiness finally learns detachment. The regret itself becomes the compass. Yet here lies the paradox. The soul's lament is not meant to breed despair, but awareness. If we accept that our families are not accidents but choices, however imperfect, then we must also accept that we are not victims of our bloodlines, but students of them. The question lingers, suspended in the space between lives. When you stand once more in the halls of pre-birth, what will you seek? Not in fear, but in wisdom. Let that question settle. For the chains we feel now may be the very threads we once wove in haste, and the hands that unravel them are our own. The weight of karmic chains, how the soul's choice binds or frees. They say the soul in its infinite wisdom selects its earthly vessel with purpose. Yet what happens when that choice becomes a shackle rather than a stepping stone? Edgar Cayce's readings speak of karmic chains not as mere metaphors but as tangible energetic bonds forged in the unseen realms before birth. These are not the crude iron links of medieval dungeons, but something far more insidious, invisible threads woven from unfulfilled vows, unresolved conflicts, and the silent echoes of past life debts. Imagine them as the rusted remnants of a ship's anchor, dragging the soul through the tides of incarnation, each lifetime pulling it deeper into the same turbulent waters, unless the pattern is broken. History offers haunting glimpses of these chains in action. Consider the royal bloodlines of Europe, where souls bound by ambition and betrayal found themselves reborn into the same cycles of power and downfall. Henry VIII's tyrant spirit echoing in the genes of his descendants, or the Habsburgs, their jaws deformed by generations of inbreeding, a physical manifestation of karmic entanglement. Or turn to the slave trade's dark legacy, where souls who once wielded the whip returned as the oppressed, their chains now forged from the steel of collective suffering, each lifetime a chance to dissolve the debt, or deepen it. Cayce warned that these bonds do not disappear with death. They linger coiled around the soul's essence, waiting to be acknowledged, atoned for, or transcended. Yet here lies the paradox. The chain that binds is also the key that liberates. A soul who recognizes the weight of its inheritance, whether the burden of a tyrant's lineage, or the silence of an ancestor's unspoken grief, holds the power to alchemize it. The moment the pattern is seen, the chain begins to corrode. A descendant of conquerors may choose humility. An heir to trauma may break the cycle through forgiveness. The Akashic records whisper of souls who, upon realizing their familial karmic loops, deliberately selected lives of service or solitude to sever the ties. One Cayce reading tells of a Roman centurion, reborn in the 19th century as a Quaker abolitionist. His sword finally melted into a plowshare. But beware the illusion of passive liberation. These chains do not dissolve through time alone. They demand conscious engagement. A soul that buries its head in the sands of denial will find the links tightening with each incarnation, the lessons growing harsher, the suffering more acute. The universe is not cruel, but it is precise. It offers no free passes, only opportunities. A mother's neglect may mirror a past life abandonment. A father's rage may echo a sword left unstayed in a forgotten battle. To ignore these signs is to walk through life as a sleepwalker, bound by forces unseen yet keenly felt in the ache of the heart, the restlessness of the spirit. For call. So one must ask, what chains do you carry? Not as a victim, but as an architect of your soul's evolution. The weight you feel, is it the residue of a vow unkept, a wrong unrighted, or a lesson deferred? The answer lies not in the stars, but in the quiet moments when the past whispers through your bones. Should you choose to listen, to trace the links back to their origin, you may find that what once felt like a prison was always a crucible, forging strength from struggle, wisdom from wounding, and at last, freedom from the very chains that once held you. The alchemy of adversity, how the soul transmutes struggle into wisdom, and so the soul, bound by the weight of its own choosing, descends into the crucible of a family that was never meant to be gentle. Edgar Cayce's readings whisper of such journeys, where the spirit, in its infinite wisdom, or perhaps its reckless courage, selects a lineage fraught with discord, neglect, or even cruelty. Yet what if these trials were not a mistake, but the very forge in which its highest potential would be revealed? The records of the Akashic archives suggest that the most profound souls often select the most arduous paths, not out of ignorance, but because they recognize that light is most vivid when cast against the darkest backdrops. Consider the case of the soul who, in a 19th century reading, chose to incarnate into a family of rigid dogmatists, only to later shatter those chains by becoming a voice of radical compassion. Or the spirit who, in ancient Persia, was born to a warlord's bloodline, yet used the suffering witnessed in childhood to fuel a lifetime of peacemaking. These are not anomalies, but echoes of a divine paradox. The family that wounds is often the same family that forces the soul to awaken. The struggle becomes the chisel, shaping raw potential into resilience, empathy, and an unshakable inner knowing. Cayce himself spoke of souls who, after lifetimes of ease, chose hardship because they understood that comfort breeds stagnation, while adversity demands evolution. Yet the art lies not in the suffering itself, but in the transmutation. A soul trapped in cycles of resentment remains shackled. One that alchemizes pain into purpose becomes liberated. The ancient Gnostics called this the turning of the poison into medicine, a process where every betrayal teaches discernment, every abandonment cultivates self-reliance, and every injustice ignites a fire for justice. The challenge then is not to escape the family's shadow, but to recognize it as the very soil from which the soul's greatest strengths could grow. And so one must ask, what if the family you once believed was your greatest burden was in truth your most sacred teacher? What if the wounds you carry are not scars, but the markings of a warrior's initiation? The soul does not choose its trials at random. It selects them with the precision of a master craftsman, knowing that gold is purified only through fire. Perhaps the mistake was never the family itself, but the belief that the struggle was meant to break you, rather than reveal you. Let this be the moment you reconsider the weight you've carried, not as a curse, but as the raw material of your becoming. For it is in the darkest corners of our lineage that we often find the hidden keys to our liberation, if only we dare to look. The alchemy of liberation, ancient paths to dissolving karmic chains across the annals of spiritual tradition. There exists a silent understanding that the soul, though bound by the choices of its past, is never without recourse. Edgar Cayce's readings whisper of forgotten contracts, of families selected in haste or ignorance, yet they also reveal the hidden keys to unshackling oneself from the weight of such decisions. The ancients knew this well. In the shadowed temples of Egypt, where initiates underwent the weighing of the heart, they did not merely fear judgment, they prepared for it through rituals of purification. The Hindus spoke of prayashchitta, the art of atonement, where specific acts, mantras chanted at dawn, offerings to the sacred fire, or pilgrimages to the Ganges could dissolve the residues of misaligned destinies. In the quiet monasteries of Tibet, the Chud practice taught that even the most entrenched karma could be severed by feeding one's fears to the divine, transforming suffering into liberation. Yet the most profound method, echoed from the Essenes to the mystics of Sufism, is forgiveness, not as a passive surrender, but as an active alchemy. Cayce himself described it as the great eraser of time's mistakes. To forgive the family that wounded, the parent who failed, or the lineage that burdened is to rewrite the soul's contract in the present tense. It is not absolution for them, but emancipation for the self. Meditation too serves as a bridge between worlds. The Vipassana tradition insists that by observing the roots of pain without reaction, one dissolves the karmic seeds planted in past lives. Even the simple act of lighting a candle while reciting the names of one's ancestors, a practice found from Mexican Dia de los Muertos altars to Japanese Obon ceremonies, can realign a soul's trajectory. For fire has always been the element of transformation. But what of those who walk unaware? The unseen threads of karma tighten only when ignored. The call then is to step into the role of the conscious architect. Let the curious consider this: if the family was chosen in error, might its lessons still be harvested for wisdom? Could the very act of seeking these practices, whether through the silence of meditation, the utterance of an ancient prayer, or the deliberate release of resentment, be the first step in choosing anew? The soul's journey is not a sentence but a story. Every story, no matter how burdened its beginning, can be rewritten. The paradox of choice, where free will meets the soul's contract, long before the ink of destiny dried upon the scrolls of time. The ancient mystics of Persia whispered of a cosmic ledger, one where the soul in its luminous state selected not merely a life but a lineage. Yet here lies the enigma. If the family is chosen before birth, where does free will begin, and where does the predetermined script end? Edgar Cayce's readings suggest a tension older than recorded history itself, a dance between the soul's sovereign choices and the karmic threads it inherits. The Stoics of Greece argued that while fate may set the stage, it is the actor who decides how to perform. Meanwhile, the Hindu Bhagavad Gita speaks of dharma, the sacred duty bound to one's birth, yet insists that the soul's liberation depends on how one engages with that duty. The conflict is not merely philosophical, it is personal. Consider the case of the 12th century mystic Hildegard of Bingen, who, in her visions, described souls bound to families as both a test and a blessing, a paradox where the constraints of bloodline become the very crucible for spiritual growth. Her writings reveal that some souls in their pre-birth state overestimate their readiness for certain familial trials, only to find themselves ensnared in cycles of unresolved conflict. Cayce's readings echo this. A soul may choose a family to resolve past life debts, yet if the lessons are avoided, the karmic weight compounds, generation after generation. The question then arises, was the choice ever truly free, or was it the illusion of freedom within a divinely ordained framework? Yet history offers a counterpoint. The Sufi poet Rumi, born into a lineage of scholars, once wrote that the soul's greatest error is not in the choosing, but in the forgetting that every family, no matter how flawed, is a mirror. The challenge is not to escape the reflection, but to see it clearly. If Cayce's assertions hold truth, then the soul's regret is not the family itself, but the failure to transmute its trials into wisdom. And so the invitation lingers. What if the tension between free will and predestination is not a conflict to resolve, but a sacred tension to inhabit? How might your own life shift if you viewed your family not as a mistake, but as the soul's chosen classroom? What would change if you dared to ask, what was I meant to learn here? The Alchemy of Pain, souls who transformed karmic chains into wings. And so the records of Edgar Cayce whisper of those who stumbled into the fire of their lineage, only to emerge not as victims but as alchemists of their own fate. Consider the case of Eleanor Sidgwick, a woman whose soul Cayce revealed had chosen a bloodline steeped in generational silence, a family where love was measured in obligations, not embraces. Her childhood was a ledger of unspoken grief, each page turned in solitude. Yet it was within this very desolation that her spirit forged its greatest strength. By her 30th year, she had not only broken the cycle of emotional exile, but had become a beacon for others trapped in similar labyrinths. Her story does not stand alone. It is but one thread in a tapestry woven by souls who, upon realizing the weight of their karmic inheritance, refuse to let it define them. Then there is the lesser-known account of Marcus Veller, a man whose past life readings disclosed a soul agreement with a father who would embody the very tyranny his spirit needed to confront. The battles waged in that household were not mere clashes of will, but sacred duels, each conflict a lesson in reclaiming power. Decades later, Marcus would stand before audiences not as a survivor of paternal oppression, but as a teacher of spiritual sovereignty. His life became a testament to Cayce's assertion that even the most arduous familial bonds are not punishments, but curricula designed by the soul itself for its evolution. What unites these narratives is not the absence of suffering, but the transmutation of it. The soul, Cayce insisted, is never a passive recipient of its lineage's burdens. It is the architect of its redemption. The pain of a mismatched family, when met with consciousness, becomes the chisel that sculpts resilience from raw experience. Here, the question lingers like an unspoken prayer. What if the family you once believed was your greatest mistake was, in truth, the crucible your soul selected to refine its light? Let this inquiry settle into the chambers of your heart, for it is not the family we are born into that ultimately shapes us. It is the meaning we extract from the journey. Perhaps, in the quiet spaces between regret and revelation, you will find that your own story too is being rewritten, not as a tale of limitation, but as an odyssey of the spirit's unstoppable ascent, the soul's path to unbinding, a guided reflection on karmic healing. And so the question lingers, what if the chains that bind were never meant to be eternal? What if the family chosen in haste, or in the shadows of unresolved pasts, could become the very crucible in which the soul forges its liberation? Edgar Cayce's readings whisper of such possibilities, where regret is not the end, but the threshold of transformation. Here, in the quiet between breaths, one may begin to unravel the threads of destiny woven long before birth. Consider, for a moment, the lives of those who stood at this precipice. There was Eleanor, a woman whose soul, Cayce revealed, had selected a lineage steeped in silence, generations where words of love were swallowed before they could form. For decades, she carried the weight of unseen expectations, believing herself fated to repeat the cycles of emotional exile. Yet, in the stillness of her 43rd year, she posed a question not to the heavens, but to the depths of her own memory. What if this family was not my prison, but my mirror? The answer did not come as revelation, but as a slow unfolding, a recognition that the very absence she mourned had carved within her a capacity for compassion so vast, it could hold not just her pain, but the unspoken sorrows of those who came before. She began to speak, not to them but for them. In doing so, the chains loosened, link by link. Or take the case of Marcus, whose soul, burdened by karmic debts of betrayal, had chosen a bloodline where trust was a currency long devalued. His life became a ledger of grievances, each entry a proof of his inherited curse, until one evening he traced the lineage not through the lens of wounding but of witnessing. He saw his grandfather's hardened heart not as a legacy to perpetuate, but as a lesson in what happens when a soul forgets its own light. He chose then to break the pattern not through force but through the quiet rebellion of forgiveness, not for them, for himself. Now, turn the gaze inward. If the soul's greatest misstep was in its choosing, then its greatest wisdom lies in its re-choosing. Close your eyes and summon the faces of those who shaped your earliest understanding of love, worth, and belonging. Feel the weight of the unseen contracts signed before your first breath. Then ask, not with the mind that seeks answers but with the heart that already knows, what did I agree to learn here? Was it resilience in the face of neglect? Was it the alchemy of turning judgment into discernment, or silence into sacred pause? The karmic chain is not broken by fleeing but by seeing, by recognizing that every soul in that ancestral tapestry was once a traveler just as lost, just as hopeful. The healing begins when one ceases to ask, why was I given this family, and starts to inquire, what did my soul intend to create through them? For in that shift lies the key, not to escape the past but to transmute it. The stories of Eleanor and Marcus are not exceptions, they are invitations, proof that the wrong choice can become the right teacher, if one dares to meet it with curiosity instead of condemnation. So now, take a breath, place a hand upon your heart and whisper to the soul that chose this path, I see you, I see why you thought this was the way, and I am ready now to walk it differently. The chains are not iron, they are illusions, waiting to dissolve in the light of a single courageous question, will you ask it? And so the tapestry of the soul's journey unfolds not as a linear path, but as a labyrinth of choices, each thread woven with intention, yet not always with foresight. Edgar Cayce's revelations remind us that the family we select before birth is not merely a backdrop to our existence, but a crucible in which karma is forged. Lessons are burned into the spirit, and the echoes of past lives resonate with consequence. The regret some souls carry is not born of weakness, but of the profound weight of misalignment, a choice that, though made in wisdom's shadow, may bind them to cycles of unrest until the lesson is learned, the debt repaid. Yet within this intricate design lies an unspoken truth. No soul is ever truly trapped. The chains of karma are not iron, but threads of energy, and energy, by its very nature, transforms. The regret that lingers in the Akashic records is not a sentence, but an invitation to revisit, to understand, to alchemize suffering into wisdom. The families we are born into, no matter how fraught with challenge, serve as mirrors, reflecting back the fragments of ourselves we have yet to claim. In that reflection, if we dare to look deeply enough, we find the keys to our own liberation. Consider then, the souls who have walked this path before you, those who, in Cayce's readings, stood at the precipice of despair, only to discover that their greatest mistakes were also their greatest teachers. Their stories whisper to us across time, the mother who chose a lineage of violence, only to become the one to break its curse. The child born into indifference, who later recognized that very emptiness as the space where compassion could take root. These are not exceptions, but exemplars of a universal principle. Every misstep in the soul's journey is but a detour on the road to wholeness. Now, as this narrative draws to its close, you are left standing at the threshold of your own understanding. The question is no longer whether your soul has made mistakes in its choices, but how you will engage with the wisdom those choices have birthed. Will you see your family not as a burden, but as a sacred contract? Will you approach your karma not with fear, but with the curiosity of an alchemist, ready to transmute lead into gold? The path forward is not one of blind acceptance, nor of rebellion, but of conscious participation. To explore your lineage with open eyes, to ask without flinching, what did my soul intend to learn here? And then with courage, to extract the lesson, release the regret, and step into the next chapter, not as a victim of fate, but as its co-creator. The records of your soul's journey are still being written. What will you inscribe in them next?